This is Parshas Vayetzei. We have Yaakov Avinu. It says in Pasuk, Vayetzei Yaakov Beersheva El Charana. Yaakov leaves Beersheva. He's running away from Esav and so on, and he's going towards Haran, to the house of Lavan, to build Klal Yisrael. And it says Vayifka b'makom, that on his way, as we know, Chazal say that he passed by the Makom HaMikdash. According to many Rishonim, that's where it was, and he stays there. He sleeps. He has the dream. The Chazal say Vayifka b'makom literally means that he sort of bumped into the place. Vayifka, Chazal say Mesachas Brachos, ein pegia al lashon tefillah. The word Vayifka b'makom, makom is one of the names of Hashem. Vayifka b'makom means that Yaakov Avinu davened, and this was the time that we know historically Yaakov was Masakin Arvis, he was Masakin Ma'ariv. That's Vayifka b'makom. So you know that Avram Avinu, that's what the Gemara in Brachos, the context of the Gemara is, that Avram is Masakin Shachris, Yitzchak is Mincha, and Yaakov is Arvis. Okay, so let's discuss that for a second. This idea of these three tefillos of Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. The question is as follows: what exactly is the order? And you'll see where I'm getting at. Is the proper way of thinking Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv? Or is the proper way of thinking Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha? Right? Because we know that in Halacha, it's a little bit funny, like how do you count a day, right? So we know that B'derech Klal, we count a day starting from the night, right? Shabbos starts Friday night. So it's night and then day. On the other hand, we know when it comes to, let's say, Kadshim, the Halachas of the Beis HaMikdash, it's day and then night. So if you have a carbon, for example, and you're allowed to eat it for a day, so that is day and night, not night and day. So the question is as follows: when we're thinking of the three tefillas, do we think of them in terms of Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv? That's the unit of time, starting from the morning, ending that night. You know what I'm saying? Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. Or is it Ma'ariv, Shachris, and Mincha?
You can't make up if you missed Mincha. You don't make it up at Ma'ariv. You miss Shachris, make it up at Mincha. You miss Ma'ariv.
So we'll get to that in a second. So the truth is like this: there are what seems to be a little bit of a stira in Chazal, whether we should think of it as Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, or Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha. Let's go with the arguments that it's Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, and you'll see what's the difference in a second. Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. So the Gemara says, for example, I referenced it a moment ago. The Gemara says that the three tefillos we have, there's machlokes in the Gemara whether tefillos keneged avis tiknum, right? Were the avis misakin the three davenings, or were they established to reflect the carbon tamid? So let's go with avis. Well, if avis, we know it's Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, right? That's the order. So that should be Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, right? If it's keneged tamidim, if it's keneged the karbanis of the Beis HaMikdash, then that's also Shachris is for the carbon tamid shel Shachar, Mincha is a tamid shel Bein Harbayim, and Ma'ariv is the nighttime when all the fats and limbs of the tamid shel Shachar were continued burning that night. So whether it's Avis or whether it's Tmidim, it's Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. And in fact also, the first Mishnah in Brachos where it talks about the halachas of Kriya Shema, so it's well known. The first Mishnah talks about the Kriya Shema shel Arvis, right? When do you begin Kriya Shema the night? And the Gemara explains that we're doing that because, it says B'shach b'cha uvkumecha, and Hashem created the world, night and then day. But it's interesting, in the fourth parak of Mesachas Brachos, where it starts talking about the halachas of Shemona Esrei, the way the Mishnah starts is Tfilas HaShachar is Ad Chatzais. That Shachar you could daven until midday, Mincha you could do until the nightfall, and Ma'ariv you can do all night. So the order of the Mishnah is Shachar, Mincha, Ma'ariv. So these are indications, again, whether it's the Avis, whether you go based on Karbanis, the Mishnah in Brachos, it all seems to be Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. On the other hand, there's other sources that would indicate that it's Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha. First of all, there's a pasuk, we say it every day, Erev Uvayker V'tzarayim, right? We say we daven to Hashem, Erev Uvayker V'tzarayim, night, morning, afternoon. That's Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha. Right? In fact, there's a pasuk, there's a medrash that makes a point of this. Is that the medrash says, how do we know that you should daven 3 times a day? And so it quotes this pasuk because we daven to Hashem, we praise Hashem, Erev Ubayker V'tzarayim. There's another Gemara that seems to go with this way also of Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha, and that's the Gemara that Naftali was referring to. There's a concept that's called Tfilas Tashlumen, right? That if you miss a tefillah, you can make it up the next time slot. So the Gemara says as follows, the Gemara Brachos. The Gemara says as follows, that we know that if you miss Shachris, make it up by Mincha, right? The Gemara says if you miss Ma'ariv, you make it up by Shachris. Ask the Gemara, what about if you missed Mincha? Can you make that up by Ma'ariv? What's the issue? The issue is it's a new day. It's a new day. So says the Gemara, on the one hand, maybe you can't make it up anymore if you miss Mincha because already you want to make it up by Ma'ariv. Ma'ariv is the next day. So the Gemara comes out, halacha l'maisa, you can. Why? Because even though it's true it is the next day, but Tashlumin, it still works. Tefillah is rachami, it's always good to daven. We can be lenient, will allow you to do Tefillah Tashlumin despite the fact that it's the next day. Now, thinking of davening in that way, that if you miss Mincha, it's questionable whether you can make it up by Ma'ariv, because Ma'ariv is the next day, that's thinking of what? Of Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha. We're thinking of it in those terms, that Ma'ariv is the new beginning. Ma'ariv is the new beginning. If you're thinking Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, then Ma'ariv is not a new beginning. Ma'ariv is a continuation of what you started with Shachris. The fact that the Gemara is thinking of davening in such a way where Ma'ariv is a new start of the next day, that's going with the way of thinking of Erev, of Boker, of Tzarayim, of Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha. So this is the stira. So which one is it? Do we think of the three parts of davening as Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv? Or do we think of it as Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha? Okay, so in it's going to be a little bit funny. In the Kisvei Ari, and the writings of the Rashash, which is amazing, the great Sfaradish Mekubalim, that really opens up the door of the Kisvei Ari, we find that they're both true. There's two separate, parallel sort of paths, or two separate constructs that you're sort of building and working with when you daven Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. On the one hand, there's one way of thinking in the following way, and this is absolutely true, that each time period that you're in, whether it be nighttime, morning, afternoon, each time period has its own particular avodah, has its own particular presence of God that you have to bring into your life at that moment. It's its own, in the language of the Arizal, there's moichin, there's spiritual consciousness that you have to bring, that each time period needs. When you think of each time period sort of on its own and needing a particular avodah, then the way to think of it, says the Rashash, is what? The way to think of it is Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha. So, Erev, Boker, Tzarayim, Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha, that's true. When you think of Shachris needs its own avodah, mornings needs its own avodah, afternoon needs its own avodah, nighttime needs its own avodah. When you think of it in that way, then the order is Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha, Erev, Boker, Tzarayim. But the Rashash explains, and again, he finds this in the Kisvei Ari, but the Rashash explains as follows: that there's another way of thinking of Mincha Ma'ariv. The other way of thinking of Mincha Ma'ariv is not only that afternoon needs its own avodah, just in a vacuum. Afternoon needs its avodah, and nighttime needs its avodah. Rather, the Rashash said there's another side to Mincha Ma'ariv, which is that even after Shachris is over, the avodah of Mincha Ma'ariv is to bring back and to reconnect to some of the koiches and some of the light and God's presence that was brought into your life by Shachris. And so Mincha Ma'ariv has two existences, two sides to it. There's a side of Mincha Ma'ariv which is Mincha exists on its own. The afternoon is its own time slot, which needs its own avodah. And there's such a thing as nighttime needing its own avodah. That's called Ma'ariv. And Shachris is its own thing, Mincha is its own thing, and Ma'ariv is its own thing. And in that order, the way we think of it is Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha. But there's another side to Mincha Ma'ariv, which is just to reconnect to what was happening by Shachris. Shachris did its avodah in the morning, but now you want to sort of reconnect to that koyach in the afternoon and at night. And that's what Mincha Ma'ariv is. And in that way of thinking, then the Iker is Shachris, and Mincha Ma'ariv is reconnecting you to that, and then it's Shachris, Mincha Ma'ariv. In that Gemara, for example, where it talks about Tashlumin, the Gemara over there is specifically thinking of it in terms of Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha for the following reason. The concept of Mincha Ma'ariv reconnecting you to the old tefillah, in that way of thinking of Shachris, Mincha Ma'ariv, of course Tashlumin work. Because the whole idea of Mincha Ma'ariv is to allow you to reconnect to an old tefillah. So in that way of thinking, Shachris, Mincha Ma'ariv, of course Tashlumin, you could go back to previous tefillas. Because that's the whole idea of Mincha Ma'ariv, is to go back to previous tefillas. The question of the Gemara is, but what about in the way of thinking Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha, where each tefillah is its own designated time for its own designated avodah? Then maybe tefillas Tashlum doesn't work if you're going back to a previous halachic day. And even then we say it can work. The Shulman works even then, but that's what's going on over here.
Why isn't the Gemara Shaila, how does Ma'ariv reach back at all? I mean, why worry about Tashlumin?
Because
Ma'ariv can never connect.
So that's the point. Because there is a koyach that Shachris, that's what you see, that there is an ability of going back to Shachris in terms of Mincha Ma'ariv. If that's what Mincha Ma'ariv is about, then you can return to that old Shachris. But in the other lens, the other way of thinking of every tefillah being its own inyan, then who says there's such a thing as tashlumin going back to the previous day? And in other words, what the Gemara is thinking is that in order to have tefillas tashlumin, it has to make sense in both constructs. It has to make sense in terms of the construct of always returning to Shachris, and then that's totally fine because that's the mechanics of it to begin with. It's anyway like a tashlumin concept. And it also has to make sense in terms of each Zman being its own thing. And that's when it could be funny with Tashlumin, because you're going back to a halachic previous day. Even that, Kamashmal and not. But you see from this idea that, again, this is what Mincha Ma'ariv is about. By the way, this also reconnects to the Avos. Because on the one hand, with the relationship of Avram and Yaakov, because that's what we're seeing over here, if you think about it. Which one is Iker? Which one is the beginning? There's one way to think of things, is that Shachris is the beginning. And Mincha Ma'ariv is just trying to reconnect you to Shachris. On the other hand, there's another way of thinking, which is Erev Abayke B'Tzarayim, that Ma'ariv is the beginning. And after Ma'ariv, then you have Shachris and Mincha. That's corresponding to Avram and Yaakov. So which one is the Iker? The truth is, in Chazal and in Tanakh, we do find this little bit of a conflict. Is the Iker, from the Avos HaKadoshim, was the Iker Avram Avinu? He's Rosh L'Maminim, he begins Emunah, he brings us Emunah. And obviously, Yitzchak and Yaakov are there to develop and to unravel and to unpackage the Emunah that Avram Avinu brings to the world. That way of thinking is that Shachris is the Iker. And Mincha Ma'ariv is just coming to reconnect you and to deepen the appreciation and the attachment that you had by Shachris. And in that way, Avram Avinu is the Iker, and Yitzchak and Yaakov are coming to unpackage the gift of Avram Avinu. On the other hand, the Chazal say about Yaakov Avinu, the Yaakov is Bachar Shebavis. Yaakov was the greatest of all the Avos. Yaakov Avinu himself, on a personal level, reached a level of Adam Rishon Kaidem Ached. Yaakov Avinu never died on some level. Yaakov Avinu is the greatest. It says in Pasuk even, Yaakov Asher Pades Avram, that when Avram Avinu was in the fiery furnace, in whose merit that Avram Avinu saved? Chazal say, in the merit of Yaakov Avinu. So on the one hand, we understand that Avram Avinu is the Iker. He brings us Emunah, and everything else is just commentary. We say, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, but we end off Magen Avram, because Avram Avinu is the Iker in terms of Emunah. And that's true. That's true. And there's a certain way of thinking of Tefillah in that way, that the Iker is Shachris, and Mincha Ma'ariv is to reconnect you to Shachris. Mitzat Sheni, on the other hand, Avram Avinu is amazing, Yitzchak is amazing, but in terms of which individual Av reached the pinnacle, the height of greatness, Yaakov Avinu reached higher places than Avram and Yitzchak. So in that way of thinking, Yaakov is the Iker, and that's where you begin, and then you go from Ma'ariv, and then after Ma'ariv you go to Shachris and Mincha. And both of these are absolutely true. And again, that's where you see this idea, is that on the one hand there's Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, and the other hand there's Ma'ariv, Shachris, and Mincha. What's the point of all of this? I mean, again, so it's good to know when you're davening Mincha Ma'ariv, that's why, by the way, it does explain a little bit in terms of why Shachris is the longest tefillah, and we sort of feel this intuitively a little bit, where Shachris we put more kaiches into the davening, and as opposed to Mincha Ma'ariv is, that's why Ma'ariv is somewhat related to Shachris in terms of it has a length, it has Shema. There's a little bit. There's energy put into Ma'ariv, close to the energy of Shachris. Mincha is the tefillah that sort of gets lost a little bit, Chas v'Shalom, right? Because either way you go, it's just in the middle, right? Either you say that Shachris is the Iker and everything is connecting to that, so Mincha is kind of just, reconnecting to something that was, or you go with Ma'ariv, Shachris, Mincha, and then Mincha is just the end of something that started by Ma'ariv also. So either way you go, Mincha has that needs that added chizik. But what's the maskana of this? What's the point of all of this? What you see from here is a huge chiddush, which is that it is possible for a person to reconnect to madregas and koiches of the past. Person puts in shachris every single day when you're doing mincha ma'ariv. Mincha ma'ariv is to reconnect you to the koiches that you drew down in your life by shachris. Now if we extend that, if we broaden that idea, what that tells you is that madregas that a person reached, avodas that a person had, are not gone. They're not gone. They're there. They're just maybe not in the forefront, but you have the ability to reconnect to them. Particularly with Shachris, we have the ability very strongly with every Mincha and Ma'ariv, but every time, every Yom Kippur you ever had, every mitzvah you ever had, every learning you ever did, every time you were in a yeshiva, you name it, any madrega that a person reached, even when you're past it, it's not gone. It really is accessible. All you have to do is to try to remember it, to try to sort of emotionally and like intellectually and spiritually try to reconnect to those times, and you actually will become invigorated by it. This is true, by the way, not only in going in the past, this is even true in the future. Because even though it's a little bit trippy, because like there's such a thing as free will, and things that have not happened yet maybe won't happen, right? Because you have free will. But on the other hand, however you work it out, there's also such a thing as not free will. And on some level, what you're going to choose is known by Hashem. And that means that on some level, the madregas that you're going to reach already exist on some level. And just as there's such an idea of reconnecting to the power of an old chakras, there's also such a thing as connecting to the power of a future chakras and a future avodah. We find this in Chassidus a lot, that there is such an idea, it sounds a little bit funny, but there is such an idea that in order for a person to have strength in the present moment, imagine yourself as someone that has already grown. Like, in other words, let's say you want to, the particular inning that you want to grow, that you feel like you need to work on. Let's say, davening 3 times a day. That's something you want to work on. So sometimes it's hard to get yourself, to start that process. So the Kotzker used to say this. He said, imagine yourself as someone that already davens 3 times a day. And really just even imagining yourself as that person, you will actually begin to begin the process of living up to that image. Said the Kotzker, why is that? Which is this is like an imaginative trick. No. Because where a person's mind is, that's where you are. And there is a you that already davens 3 times a day. And when you mentally project yourself and connect yourself to that future self, you can actually draw energy from that place into your life right now. No different than drawing energy into Mincha Ma'ariv, into the afternoon and nighttime, because of what you did by Shachris. This is, again, this idea of Shachris being something that you're reconnecting to with Mincha Ma'ariv it opens this entire idea of time not being static in that way. That madregas, both in the past and even in the future, are accessible to a person right now, and you draw on that energy to become a better person right now. So when you're sitting and thinking and remembering something good that you did, or even dreaming about something good that you will do, that actually helps you in the present moment. That's the avodah. You connect yourself to a good place mentally, both in the past and in the future, and that'll actually enhance. It'll begin to turn you into that person even right now, and that's the avodah. That's the Avos HaKadoshim are giving us, this gift of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Either way you go, of the avodah of the present moment, but also this idea of drawing strength in the present moment by connecting yourself to something in the past or even something in the future. Hashem should help us to become the people that we imagine ourselves to become. Should be Hayyim in B'Kol Tishmo.